Righty, I think we'll get started now. So first off, I would like to start by acknowledging that we meet today, or myself, and probably many of us here meet today on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. And Stefan, our speaker, is joining us from the lands of the Narunga people. And we'd really like to pay our deep respect to their elders, past and present, and to acknowledge that they've had been tending to the ocean for tens of thousands of years. So for that we say, Natalia, thank you. I'd also like to thank everyone for joining us today on the Queen's Memorial Public Holiday. My name is Charlotte and I'm from the Port Environment Centre. So many of you might have heard of us, but if you haven't, we are a community-driven organisation and we're based in Port Adelaide, but we're really for everyone. And what we do is we have a range of resources and events and activities to kind of help people learn and connect with the environment. So first up, a little bit of housekeeping. I'll ask that you keep your mics on mute during the talk, but if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and Stefan will try to get to them as we go. And also if you can keep your cameras off, that'll just help us to keep on track. So today we're joined by Stefan Andrews, who is a very talented human who wears many hats. He is a marine biologist, a teacher, a filmmaker, a diver, and a Great Southern Reef expert, amongst other things. So I won't chew too much into his time because I know he has lots of wisdom and amazing resources to share with us. So I'll hand over to Stefan now to tell us more about Australia's less famous Great Reef. Thanks, Stefan.
Thanks very much, Charlotte, and thanks to everyone tuning in tonight. Really appreciate that you guys are joining me for the next 45 minutes or so. I'm going to share some of my knowledge and stories and photos from my adventures across the Great Southern Reef, but I thought for tonight I'd have more of a local focus about South Australian marine life and particularly the incredible biodiversity that we've got here, not too far from Adelaide and on the Yorke Peninsula, which is where I live and spent a lot of time in the water. My journey in all this started as a young, excited marine biology student. I got my diving license and that opened a whole new world for me, and right from that very first dive I was hooked. So I'm just going to share my screen here, and tonight the slides that I go through are all photos that I've taken myself, and most of these are taken within South Australia in the last probably 2 years or so. And this is a site that some of you divers may be familiar with. You're waiting to jump in on one of your local jetty sites. And that's why we're so lucky here in South Australia. We've got a lot of these really easily accessible sites that you can just jump in with very minimal effort. And it's often quite shallow and so relatively easy diving. One of the barriers for some people is the cold. But now we've got great wetsuits and some really affordable options to stay warm while you're diving in these coolish waters. So when you've got that diving gear on, for those of you that have maybe only been snorkeling, when you're diving in Southern Australia, it does add that extra element, because a lot of the time when you're snorkeling, you're up the top looking down on things, but there's a lot of small and well camouflaged critters of the Great Southern Reef that it's very tricky to see from snorkeling, and scuba diving is really a great option to be able to get up close to some of these things. So when you jump in underwater, a lot of you that have been in the water around the South Australia or anywhere in the cooler waters of Australia, you'd instantly recognize this seaweed that you can see in this image here. Its name is the common kelp, And it is a species that we actually found have got right across southern Australia. And I've got a funny story actually. When I was like at university, and we had a little checkout dive to have our professor sign us off as being, you know, competent divers. And I'd done a bit of diving before, and I was like, you know, this is going to be a walk in the park. But the, you know, professor, he held on to a bit of this golden kelp when we were underwater, and then he pointed at me, and I'm holding on to it, thinking, oh, this is an interesting test. He swims off with the other students that are getting the checkout dive, and I'm left there just at the base of this pylon, holding onto the kelp. Everyone swims off, and after about a minute or so, I realized, you know, I probably wasn't meant to be holding onto this. And yeah, later on, I was told he was just showing me this species of common kelp. And I'm like, why is this so special? It's such a common species. We see it everywhere when we're in the water here. But little did I know at that point just how profoundly impactful this particular species would be in my career as a marine biologist. So when you look closely at this golden kelp, you might realize that it provides home and shelter for many species. This here is a little clingfish, which I photographed at the Edithburgh Jetty. And this is just one of many species that will live in and around the kelp. Some species will eat it, and many species just use it for shelter or maybe lay their eggs. And other species rely on it being there in order to be able to grow, like a lot of other seaweed species. And what kelp and the golden kelp has in common with all other seaweed species is that it's got these holdfasts, and that's what they use to grip onto the rocky reefs. And that's what we've got a lot of across the southern coast of Australia. We've got a lot of these rocky reef structures, and it's the kelps that actually will cling on using that structure, the holdfast there, to be able to thrive in this environment. And there's a lot of water movement, there's a lot of sunlight, and there's perfect conditions to grow if you are well adapted to this environment. So outside of the water, you might generally see something like this. And this is what a lot of people's perspective is on the ocean across southern Australia, is just, you know, blue, bit of green and some rocks, and oh, that's really pretty. It's nice to go to the beach. But once you immerse yourself, you start seeing the golden, spectacular colors of this golden kelp. And the more that you grow to appreciate its importance, just how biologically productive it is, just how many species it supports, the carbon that it takes out of the atmosphere, you begin to see the kelp in a different light, and you begin to appreciate it more than just some seaweed, and really something very, very important for Australia as a country. Got a question from Phoebe. Where is that snorkel photo from? This is actually in Warrnambool, and there's some great sheltered, protected snorkeling locations just out from Warrnambool. So it's this golden kelp that forms the structure, or that forms basically the backbone of the Great Southern Reef. Now, if you haven't heard of the Great Southern Reef before, that's fine. I completely understand. It's not a term that's been around for a long time. It's actually a new term that is part of a project to build an identity for the reefs of the kelp forests of southern Australia. And that golden kelp that I was just talking about actually stretches across 8,000 kilometers of our coastline, all the way from Kalbarri in Western Australia to essentially the Queensland, New South Wales border. So all of this area, we have kelp forests, and actually about 70% of Australians live within 50 kilometers of a temperate reef, which is kind of surprising that, we don't really identify with the kelp forests as much as we do as a country, as our Great Barrier Reef. It does have that international recognition, and people realize that, you know, this is something really special. It's got that name, it's got that identity that people know. And what a lot of people don't realize is on their doorsteps, we've got these beautiful thriving kelp forests, and these are interconnected systems that is really, really beneficial economically to Australia as a country. Actually is worth arguably more than the Great Barrier Reef. And when scientists tried to put a bit of a value on it, they came up with a figure of over $1 billion annually. And that's, you know, a lot of it comprised of like fisheries and tourism. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those species in a little bit. But one of the most profound things about the Great Southern Reef is just its sheer biodiversity. And that's kind of what I wanted to, you know, talk most of this presentation about, is just some of the like unique and bizarre critters that actually live in these kelp forests. And the more that you go looking, the more you realize just how much life lives in these forests and the adjacent ecosystems. But to start with, it's the actual seaweed biodiversity that is so prolific. It's actually more biodiverse than pretty much anywhere else in the world when it comes to seaweed. There's 1,500 different species that live and thrive across the Great Southern Reef. And to an untrained eye, you see rocks and just seaweed. But as a marine biologist, you start to appreciate the intricate differences between some of these species. The closer you look, you just realize how much life is growing in the kelp forest canopy, and in this densely packed competition for space and sunlight to be able to thrive in this highly competitive environment. Down the base of the understory of the kelp forests, you see a whole range of different critters, from crinoids to sponges, all making the most of this micro habitat created by the golden kelp. One of the big valuable species that we've got across the Great Southern Reef is our abalone. And we've got two main species, the black and the green lip abalone. You might not be able to actually see the abalone in this image at the moment, and they do blend in really well. They do actually have a powerful suction that they're able to like go like right up against the rock and you know, suck onto that, which gives them a really good protection from predators. And if you're trying to take one off, if you don't do it correctly, you're never going to get it off. It's got such a great suction power. These things, abalone, they feed on drift algae, and that's why they like these crevices and just anywhere that the seaweed accumulates. And researchers in a relatively recent study found out that they ate up to, or even more than 50 different species of red algae. So not too fussy about perhaps which type, and there's a lot of food around, and there's a lot of great habitat. So it is actually a sustainable seafood and sustainable species if it is harvested in a careful manner. This image, you can probably see the abalone a little bit clearer. But what some people don't realize is they're actually a marine snail. So when you go up right close, you actually can appreciate that they are a snail of the sea. They are incredibly delicious too, if you know a good way to cook them. And here's another one. Can you spot the abalone in this image? On this dive, we're actually looking for abalone, didn't find any, but then I saw this image and I realized, oh, there's an ab there. The other really economically valuable species that we got in the Great Southern Reef is, of course, our rock lobster. So between the rock lobster and the abalone, these two fisheries alone are worth about or when the figures were done, about $900 million annually. So huge value there. And we're really lucky to just have this on our doorstep, such incredible fresh seafood. I've got a comment here. Is the Great Southern Reef the same thing as the Great Southern Australian Carbonate Province that is 9,000 kilometers long? I've never heard of the Great Southern Australian Carbonate Province, but that's a really interesting question. And I'm very curious to chat with you further about that one. So thanks for the question. So it's these rocks that provide the habitat for the kelps in a lot of, in a lot of cases, it's the rocky reefs, but there's also these other important adjacent ecosystems that support a whole range of life as well. So we've got our sea grass beds, and we've got some seagrass here, these little like green paddle weeds, and they actually are different to seaweeds because they've got a true root system. So the seagrass habitat, just like the kelp forests, are right across the Great Southern Reef, and they support a range of species as well. They're also really great at capturing carbon. But one thing I want to draw your attention to here is those little shellfish that are sticking into the seagrass bed there in the sort of top left of frame and down the bottom a little bit too. So those things are called razorfish. And here's an image, and I've got it zoomed in on the right, of a razorfish shell. This is one that's died, that's wedged into some sandy bottom with a lot of shell rubble there. And you might notice we've got a few species taking advantage of this perfect little underwater house. So an octopus there, and while they are mollusks, they don't actually have a shell anymore. So having something like that is a great way to have some protection. There's also like a little cardinal fish in there, and a nudibranch that's making the most of the perhaps sponge that's growing on the side of it too. So the reason why I'm showing you this is just to show that a lot of the competition is for that space and for substrate, or a nice solid structure that these different species, colonizing species, are able to grow on. And so when you start looking closely at some of these razorfish, you realize there's a lot going on here. So here's a bit of a summary of just some of the species that are growing. We've got a few different types of sponge, bryozoan. The Angarcia oyster is one of the native oysters. And so the more you look at just what are these sort of perhaps kind of ugly little shellfish that cling, that hang out in the sand, you realize like, wow, these things are actually supporting so much life. So you could arguably call these just like mini reefs. So that term reef, a lot of people just instantly think, oh, a coral reef, but we've got the rocky reefs, and we've also got these little razorfish reefs, and you can have artificial reef structures as well. So these photos were taken on the Port Hughes jetty, and if anyone's dived there, it's actually one of my favorite dive sites, and there's so much to see. But what's quite unique and different is just how much of this incredible coral that's actually growing on it. It's actually an introduced species of coral, but it just has seemed to do really well there and creates a really spectacular snowflake display. And yeah, arguably it is competing with other native species, but it does look pretty cool. And if you haven't dived Port Hughes, definitely worth having a look. So this here is in the center frame is a humpback boxfish. We've got a few different cool boxfish species, but I do want to move on and talk a little bit about fish now. Everyone loves fish. One of the first fish that really caught my attention when I was started diving Great Southern Reef is a long snout boarfish. Obviously, I just thought it looked really cool, but what instantly sort of like I loved about this fish is its nature underwater, and it was actually quite curious and like interacting with me. And the more that I dived with different fish, the more I realized they all actually do have quite a unique personality. And you also realize why some species may be more vulnerable, like to spearfishers, for example. And I would say this is one of those because, you know, they hang out in a certain area and, you know, they are inquisitive and, yeah, potentially could be an easy one to spear. That's one of the reasons why sanctuary zones are really important. This is a screenshot of some footage diving out a remote island out in the Noit's archipelago, and we had a few of these big blue groper come up and say hello. The big blue ones are the males, and you've got the smaller females around as well. And these guys are just also can be really curious on a dive. And again, like, you're more likely to see these in more remote places, in protected places. And there have been protections in place for these species for a number of years now. So in some areas, like around Kangaroo Island, for example, you can see quite a lot, which is really cool. And then probably my favorite fish, and there's a like illustration of one of these up in my office up here, is the harlequin fish. For years, I'd never seen one, and I'd heard of this kind of mystical species, which definitely does look more like a tropical species than one that you'd expect from the Great Southern Reef. But again, in line with those last two, it's an incredibly curious species, and they are very site attached, so they don't move or migrate too far. And so they find their little bit of reef, and they spend most of their life just in a very small range. And they're what we call ambush predators. So they are just generally will like perch and wait in one spot, and then they will wait for the perfect prey to go by and just smash it. They've got these big, sharp teeth too. And yeah, just love a harlequin fish. Another one that had eluded me for many years, this here is a tasseled anglerfish. And the eye, if you can't quite make it out, the eye is right in the center of the frame here. And it's just so well camouflaged to, you know, a lot of the red algae that grow around the rocks that it live in, and they just don't move. Very, very well camouflaged species. Also a ambush predator too. And so their mouth can open up really wide and suck in prey. Relative of the tasseled angler is the smooth anglerfish. It's called the smooth angler, but it's still, you know, pretty bumpy, and also can be found around a lot of the jetties and piers along South Australia. Very cool ones to spot. And I think part of it is just like how hard some of these things are to find, and that's why it's so rewarding when you do see them. There's another smooth angler there. Just love these guys. Moving on, different small fish. This here is just a little little tiny leather jacket. We've got quite a few leather jacket species in South Australia, and so they can range from being, this thing's probably only like 2 centimeters in size. Yep, that's right, like a pygmy leather jacket on this one. We've also got the mosaic leather jacket, which I think look pretty cool, and they're so thin and able to just tuck themselves under bits of sponge or whatever, and they're able to hide away pretty well. And one of the more common reefy species ones is the horseshoe leather jacket. You can see the horseshoe shape there. These often get pulled up by fishers as a bit of a pest. They're really good at sucking bait off. But when you see them underwater, you're like, these things are really beautiful. We've also got a few different types of those bockfish species. So this is the ornate cowfish. There's also the Shaw's cowfish, which looks somewhat similar. But these guys are like notoriously kind of hard to take a photo of. They're always swimming away from you. And yeah, just kind of hilarious looking how they wobble around underwater. Another one that's tricky to get a photo of is the herring kale. They move around incredibly fast and darting around over the seaweeds. And yeah, just zoom in a little bit so you can see that one. Yeah, really cool fish. Then we've got our little garnered perch. There's a few different types of garnered perch that we've got. Those spines are can be really sharp and can inflict a painful wound if you were to, again, catch one on fishing line, for example. You really want to avoid those spines. Another ambush predator just sitting in wait, and there's, the seagrass beds adjacent to jetties are just stacked full of all sorts of things like this, just waiting for their opportunity. A lot of them are more likely to come out at night, which is why I really encourage people to get involved in night diving. It's just such a great way to see different things that you might not see, and a dive site will completely transform when you check it out at night. Another sit and wait, classic flathead. When you get up real close to these guys, just see how beautiful some of the intricate patterning is around their eyes and mouth. They're really good at blending in from a distance, and then you get up close and yeah, you can see why prey are easily fooled. This here is more of a rarer species. This is a cobbler wobbegong, a bit of a mouthful, but we've got a few different types of wobbegong species across the Great Southern Reef. And this is actually a kind of mini one. They only grow up to about 1 meter or so, and they usually live in deeper waters. But again, just another example of, you just never know what you're going to see on a dive. The marine life is so diverse, and that's part of the excitement of going for a dive anywhere around here, is you just never know what's going to pop up. Another one of my favorites, this is the velvet fish. When I first saw one of these, I'd never heard of a velvet fish before. And then I saw it and it kind of blew my mind. And you can, tell just by looking at the textures on this velvet fish, just like how it gets its name, and also, yeah, how well these guys can blend in too. Here's another image, also velvet fish, but yeah, it is a completely different color, but perfectly blended into its environment. Possibly one that's going to blend in the best, arguably, if there was a competition, would be the stargazer. Very grumpy looking fish, but pretty good at blending in when it wants to. All we can really see there is just those two eyes and the big mouth that it will use to smash unsuspecting prey as it goes past. And here's how the stargazer looks actually when it's out, and yeah, not how it would usually be covered in all of the sands and everything. So it's quite unusual to see one that was hanging out of the sand bed. Don't see these guys very often. Very, very cool though when you do see one. So there's a lot going on underwater, and yeah, predation is big in the ocean. Like anything that is not careful could get snapped up at any minute. And the squid are just great ambush predators, and they're good at seizing that opportunity to be able to grab something that may look weak or vulnerable. And this here is your classic southern calamari, or the squid that you eat from the fish and chip shop. There's a lot of these around, and yeah, just always really, really exciting just seeing any sort of cephalopods, so squid or octopus underwater. They're by far my favorite to take photos of or take video. Next, we're moving on to the cephalopods here, and this here is a sand octopus, or also known as the Ghana octopus. So it's really cool to have a species that's named after the Aboriginal people of the Ghana region in Adelaide Plains. And the interesting thing about the Ghana octopus is it's unlike other species, it's not able to change its color to blend in. So it's kind of stuck with that sort of orangey thing, but it's got a different skill to avoid predation, and that is it just buries itself, which is quite fun to watch. They'll go into the seagrass areas and then just basically just bury, and pretty effective way of escaping being eaten, I would say. Just remind you guys, if you got any questions throughout this, feel free to drop in the chat. Happy to answer them as we go, or we can save it for the end. All right, another one that's really unique to, can most octopi change colors, Charlotte? Yes, pretty much all of them, except for that garnet octopus. It's, yeah, kind of a unique thing about it. And I guess there was some sort of trade-off, I guess, for not investing that energy into changing colors. This here is a cute little pajama squid. Just love these guys too. This is actually something, I worked as a dive guide for a while, and you get people traveling from all over the world. This is actually one species that its range is very localized to a few dive sites, really. There's not a lot of places that you can reliably see these. And that's what makes them quite special. And yeah, there's lots of stories about all of these different species, but I'm just sort of giving a brief summary of some of them because there's so many different forms of life across the Great Southern Reef. And there's so this last one, even though it's called a pajama squid, it's actually a cuttlefish. It's more closely related to a cuttlefish. Then we've got our dumpling squid as well. And you can see all of these like little shells and bits of grit. They're actually glued on by the dumpling squid in this case. And it's got a unique ability. If it wants to flee, it's able to just, essentially pull a trigger, everything comes off, and it's able to bail and escape. But sometimes, like when you see that they've noticed that you've noticed them, they'll just like be sitting there putting little bits of shell and like pretending that they're not there. So yeah, very cool personalities, these guys. Peter asked, what camera setup are you using for these shots? Well, this is one of my older images. For many years, I was using a Panasonic GH4 with an Olympus lens, which was what was the lens? It was like an 18 to 50 millimeter with a macro setting. But in the last 2 years, I've changed, and I'm now shooting with a Canon R5, and the macros are shot with an 85 millimeter RF lens. So still on the theme of cuttlefish, we have, I can't do this presentation without mentioning the giant cuttlefish aggregation that we have in South Australia in Whyalla. And yeah, if you haven't been in the water to see this event that happens every winter, it is a must see. There's so much going on. And if you do want a taste of some more footage of the cuttlefish, just released today on Disney Plus is a documentary that I assisted with. And yeah, there's a sequence on the giant cuttlefish. The series is called Super/Natural, and just watched it for the first time today. It's a really cool sequence by John Shaw on the cuttlefish there. So yeah, hopefully that's enough to inspire you to go check it out. It's yeah, I won't go into a lot of detail about this now, but if you do want to learn more about it, I did a podcast with a guy called Matt Testoni. He's got a podcast called the Sea Creatures Podcast, and we chatted for about half an hour all about this aggregation. So worth a look. And also, while I'm onto it, if you do like this sort of thing, check out that podcast. There's a lot of really cool episodes about different marine species on there. All right, moving on. Definitely a real, I don't even know what to say about these. They're just so incredible to watch underwater, is the blue ring octopus. I guess they're a bit infamous for their ability to, you see all these stats, like they've got enough toxin to kill like 20 adults. And the reality is, yes, they do have a lot of toxin in them, and they do have, these crazy abilities to be able to do damage. But when you spend time with the blue ring octopus, you realize that they are quite chilled out octopus, and most of the time they just want to find a nice way to get away from you, like this diver thing, like no. But sometimes you'll find them just happily cruising around, like hunting or exhibiting interesting behaviors. The key is just being patient, and the more time you spend in the water, the more that you actually like see in terms of some of these behaviors. And I think what's interesting too is when you dive throughout the whole year, you tend to see certain species more at certain times of the year. Like the blue ring octopus, we tend to see more in summer months, I've found. And if you think about it, the warmest water, they're a bit more active, the metabolism's moving a little bit faster. And then it's in winter that you sometimes see them, because towards the end of summer, the blue ring octopus, they will mate, and the males actually die off after the mating. And it's the females that hang around afterwards to guard the eggs, and they stop feeding at that point. And so this is a really sick looking old one, and its purpose is basically just to basically just to care for those eggs long enough so they're able to hatch. And it's around this time of year, when the water starts warming up again, that you can often see these tiny little hatchlings of blue ring octopus around our waters. So I was lucky enough to see this at the Port Noarlunga jetty at a night dive, and there was just so many of them. And that's how they reproduce, is just in sheer numbers. Hopefully some of them will survive, but of course at that stage they are incredibly vulnerable. Question here, Janice, would it be possible to share the presentation? Yes, it's getting recorded, so 100% you'll be able to access this later. And for sure. Charlotte, I saw one of these, surprised how small it was. How big can they get? The adults can probably grow to, I don't have like a specific figure, but I'm thinking maybe about up to 10 centimeters, I'm guessing. So I'm sure someone can fact check me on that one. But yeah, definitely smaller than a lot of other octopus. No, I'm thinking smaller than 10 now. Everything looks bigger underwater. All right, so moving on, we've gone from cuttlefish to octopus to sea spiders. You don't see these too often, but I just think, they look really cool, and just definitely wanted to include in this presentation. Now onto our sea slugs, or nudibranchs, and across Southern Australia we do have quite a few species. Some you see more than others, and even though you can get, I'll just skip onto it. This one here is definitely the most abundant. They look amazing. They're really cool looking nudibranchs. And the thing is, when you're diving a lot, and like a lot of the time you're looking for new things, that's what you get most excited about. So it's quite funny when you're like guiding some divers and they spot these and they're getting all excited and pointing at them to you and like, yeah, that's great. And then you could see something like this one here that's blending in and they can't barely see it, but you haven't seen it that often and you're getting all excited. But for those of you that don't know what nudibranchs are, they are sea slugs, and they've got these little sensory organs called the rhinopores, and that's what they use to sense their environment. And they've also got, this is where they get their name, nudibranch, nude gills, and they exchange their respirational gases using their gills that stick out on their back. And what's kind of cool about these is how they've got this lump on the back, and that's actually an accumulation of toxins from things that they've eaten. And it's a cool decoy, I guess, for fish and things that are like, oh, this looks like a tasty snack. They'll take a taste of that and they'll be like, oh no, this is doesn't taste good at all. And we'll recognize that striking color. I'm not touching that again. And that could be a reason why they're so successful. This here is actually a worm, and also using the large surface area of this fan-like structure to be able to exchange gases and feed. So sometimes you'll see these a lot of the time on jetty pylons, and when you come up close, they'll retract into the little hole. Okay, not like you see a common theme here. A lot of things are trying not to be seen. And this is no exception to the golden decorator crab. And the golden decorator, as its name suggests, is very good at dress up. And you can see here it's got what looks like seaweed on its head. Well, it is seaweed. It's growing a seaweed farm on its head. And what this is in this area, common type of seaweed that's growing, it's probably its best chance of blending in is picking seaweed from this area, growing it on my head, and tends to work pretty well for them. And they've got these little hooks that are underneath, well, that are on their shell, and they're able to, they can even change what they're growing on there. So yeah, pretty cool animals. I love seeing the golden decorator crabs. Next one, this crab's also one that you see pretty often as a rock crab, and it's got these nice big chunky claws that they use to break onto. They love eating like mussels and oysters and shellfish, so they're often chomping away, which is really, really cool. Yeah, not one that the crabbers like to catch though. They're more after the blue swimmer crabs. Okay, we moved on to our pipefish now. So this pipefish is one that you'll see commonly around the Gulf, and Port Hughes, I think, is probably one of the best places to see pipefish. This one's got a funny looking thing on its face, and it's an isopod. It's a parasite. It's latched on there, and yeah, the poor pipefish is really going to be suffering. It's not in an ideal spot. It's going to really affect its ability to get food here. And yeah, the more you look, you do see these isopods growing on quite a lot of fish, particularly that you see under these jetties. So yeah, it's a bit sad when you see them. Related to our pipefish is a seahorse. Here we've got the short-headed seahorse. They're pretty small. They're maybe 1 to 2 centimeters in size. And I think the funny thing with these seahorses is if you're not looking for them, you won't see them. But if you know the type of seaweed that they live on, if you know like roughly where you might expect to see them, then they're everywhere. In certain areas, like you'd be surprised just how many there are, and just how easy they are to swim past. And often, at night too, they're good ones to spot because they crawl up from being on the sea floor right up to the tops of the seaweed canopy, because they want to get away from predators like the crabs that are out scavenging at night. So they're just hanging out up there. It's nice and safe. I'm going to skip through a little bit here because I know we are, we've only got limited time here tonight. So another short-headed seahorse, different type of environment that it's living in. And yeah, you can just see how well suited it is to that particular area with its color. So good at blending in. Couldn't have done this presentation without mentioning the leafy sea dragons, of course. This is the marine emblem, South Australia. We do have these not only in South Australia, but also in some parts of Western Australia. They are, just the most beautiful creatures to see underwater. And in some areas, again, you're more likely to see them than others. And if you've never seen one and you want to see one, your best chance of spotting one is going with an experienced guide, but there's never any guarantees. There's there's a lot of there's a lot of pressure on the guide that's going to take you out, because often we have people come from all over the world specifically to see and photograph these guys. But the ocean is like that. You never have a guarantee that you are going to see one. And yeah, it's just important to quickly flag here that the eyes of leafy sea dragons are particularly vulnerable to the strobes, like the flashes of underwater lights and video lights in particular. So it's important, yeah, just if you are taking photos or video, just to be cautious of that one. And there is a leafy sea dragon divers code of conduct, which is worth checking out and promoting as well. So eggs, yeah, it's the male that will hold the eggs. And I believe it's about 6 weeks or so it takes for the eggs to hatch. And then they turn into beautiful little dragons. This is actually a weedy. So the last ones were leafy, but in the poster for tonight's event, there was the weedy sea dragon. And this is a real baby. I photographed this one at Rapid Bay. When I first saw it, I thought it was a juvenile leafy. To this day, I still haven't seen the really real early life stage of the leafy, but it was pretty special to see this early life stage of the weedy, and got lucky and managed to get a snap before it disappeared into the seagrass. Very cool. On one of the other images, there was yeah, you could see a tiny little remnant of the yolk sac of the egg. So it must have been only days old. Another one that is a bit of an icon in Southern Australia is our Port Jackson sharks. And they can grow up to over 1.5 meters in size. So not massive sharks, but still they can grow, I think it's about 30 years or so, 30 years old. And they could be confused with a similar looking shark that you see on the eastern states, the crested horn shark. But the Port Jackson shark's got this harness-like markings. And yeah, if you want to learn more about the Port Jackson shark, we got a great article on the Great Southern Reef website that features a presentation by a Port Jackson shark expert with lots and lots of information about those. It's really exciting when they all come together to aggregate, to mate with each other. And you may be familiar with those like corkscrew style eggs that get screwed into the rocky reefs. And then it takes about a year or so for that shark to develop and be born. So certain times of the year, you can see the juveniles just swimming around, particularly around the Port Noarlunga Reef Sanctuary Zone, a really cool place to spot them. So sharks often get this, bad image. The Port Jackson sharks are very much harmless. But yeah, it's a little bit ironic to see this event where one of these guys is, well, this is an Australian sea lion, but we've got seals as well, which is what I saw actually ripping into a Port Jackson shark just a couple of years ago out from Second Valley. So it's the seals are the top dog, even higher than the sharks in this case, and captured some video of this. It was pretty gnarly, actually. A cool little brief story about this encounter was the seal ripped into the shark, was just getting like the heart, the liver, the nutritiously dense parts of it, and dropped the rest of the shark down, swam back down, like knew I was there, swam down back to the reef, grabbed another one and just basically held it in front of me, almost as if it was teaching me like these things are not that hard to get. And but it just let that one go. So yeah, it was pretty cool. The Port Jackson sharks too, there have been a lot of unfortunate incidences where the fishermen catch them on jetties and they think, oh, this shark's bad, it's eating all the fish, or we just don't like them, and they will kill them and then throw them over or mutilate them. And yeah, it's really uncool. So we teach people to value and respect the sharks. And if you do see any activity like that, please speak up. Then if you're out in the deeper waters, if you're really lucky, you might come across some pelagic species. So we've got here the yellow-tailed kingfish and then a Samson fish up top. You really, rarely see these in the sheltered protected waters, but yeah, when you're lucky, you can see some of these, really prized, highly valuable fish that often, in like fine dining restaurants. And the Great Southern Reef does support a lot of these, beautiful, strong pelagic fish as well. When you start going beyond the reefs and start getting deeper, that's where I'm personally like really excited at the moment, because you get beyond where the kelp can grow and you enter these environments that there's not enough sunlight for kelp, but there's still that fierce competition for space and food. So you'll see these incredible sponge gardens, and this is an example of the sort of thing that you might see in the deeper waters around Kangaroo Island, for example, but also right across the Great Southern Reef. Some more like crazy looking sponges, and these things can start around that sort of like 30-meter mark. The deeper you go, the more crazy it gets pretty much. And those areas are really quite understudied. These beautiful yellow zoanthids. And so zoanthids, they look a bit like anemones, but they're not. And they're, sometimes called soft corals, but they're not true soft corals. But yeah, I'm running out of time here a little bit, but yeah, fascinating species. I'll just quickly push on because there's a couple of points that I want to make about all this biodiversity. One, the reason why a lot of people don't realize that just what we've got here across the Great Southern Reef is research is really quite challenging and can be quite expensive and can be hard to get the funding in the first place to do the research. And so we're up against competition with the Great Barrier Reef, which gets a lot of funding for research. But the issue here is as well, like we got huge areas of coastline that are just completely inaccessible and incredibly hard to get to. So the issue is, and this is a quote from a renowned marine ecologist and the author of one of my go-to guides for marine invertebrates, Karen Gallett-Holmes. Also, yeah, this is definitely a really great resource for those interested in this sort of thing. She's saying that, we have got such a lack of understanding about what's even there. And the problem is these ecosystems are under threat and things are changing. And we don't even have a good catalogue of what's in our oceans across Southern Australia. So to give you a bit of an example, when there was all this proposed drilling in the Great Australian Bight, researchers actually started looking, and they did these surveys in the deeper waters beyond where much science had been conducted before, came across all these crazy species. About 30% they'd never, they're completely new to science. There's still so much. It's estimated that there's thousands of species still to be discovered down there. So it's kind of alarming, but also really surprising, but also kind of exciting for up and coming people interested in studying this space. Before I wrap up, I do just quickly want to mention some of the threats to the Great Southern Reef. And a big one is climate change. And I'll talk about that in a second, but it's pretty crazy that with climate change impacting so much of the earth and acknowledging that it's a problem, and with the new government coming in announcing an emissions target of 43% by 2030, to think that there's these new oil and gas exploration permits being opened up, it kind of baffles me. The first step in these exploration activities is seismic testing. So they blast big, really loud explosions into the ocean. They have got acoustic receivers that helps form a map of the seafloor. So yeah, great for developing an image, maybe not so good for the marine life. And just like we saw in the last day or two with all of the strandings of whales, they've already got enough challenges as it is. And by doing something like this, it's, to be able to find new oil and gas reserves that we really shouldn't be tapping into is just crazy that this sort of thing's being supported. So this is the type of area that's being opened up, and it's going to start as soon as December if we don't stand up and do stuff about it. And yeah, they'll be doing about 200 up to 200 days of that testing. So yeah, happy to chat more if anyone wants to about this sort of thing afterwards. But when we're talking about climate changing impacting the Great Southern Reef, we've already got the strongest warning in Tasmania with our giant kelp. Now, 95% of the giant kelp has disappeared from Tasmania in the last couple of decades. And that is a direct result of the warmer, nutrient poor waters being pushed down of the strengthening Eastern Australian current. And it's contributing to more warm species coming down and causing havoc in these areas, particularly Tasmania, and also the west coast of Australia is what we're calling a climate change or a global warming hotspot. So in the top 10% globally of warming in the last 5 decades. And there's some pretty alarming figures getting thrown around that we could lose, you know, between 40 and 50% of that golden kelp if we don't do something about it and curb those emissions and protect what we've got. Urchins are another like really big threat to the Great Southern Reef. These things are herbivores and they can reproduce rapidly. They can destroy areas. I'm aware I'm running out of time, but yeah, the scale of the sea urchin issue in across the Great Southern Reef is enormous, and something that requires enormous attention and funding too, because they can seriously destroy a lot of habitat. When you go from a kelp forest to an urchin barren, you've only got about 1% of the productivity there. You're going from a highly productive system to essentially a barren, highly low productive. So you can see here, this is kind of like the shift. This is a great graphic by Antoine. And yeah, just the challenges that we're facing are enormous, but what needs to be done is, yeah, more attention brought to the reefs. And the first step is acknowledging that they're there and how much we rely on them. Second step is, you know, getting some more funding. But a big thing is around education, which is what I'm incredibly passionate about. And then also building community around these reefs, which is why we've recently launched the Great Southern Reef Foundation. And we've got 3 main pillars with what we do, which is community, education, and science. So with the education side of things, in addition to being a marine biologist, I'm also an educator, and I've worked in schools in Australia and overseas, and I've used my experience and knowledge in marine science and teaching to develop resources that are relevant to schools here in Australia. And up until now, there hasn't been that much in terms of resources available for people to learn about the kelp forest ecosystems. And if you do want to check those out, there's more on the Great Southern Reef website. We are going to be developing more in times ahead. So yeah, really excited on the education front. There's a lot happening in this space. Around community, there's so many great groups doing awesome stuff across the Great Southern Reef to look after their patch or their beach, their area. And what we want to promote is all of the great work that's being done, so other areas can learn and be like, oh, these guys are also on the Great Southern Reef. What can we learn from them? Let's work together. And by promoting that, there's a lot that can be achieved on a larger scale. And just like what we saw with Equinor getting kicked out of Australia, doing their drilling in the Great Australian Bight, when we come together from right across the country, we can be incredibly powerful. And that's what we're trying to achieve with the community side of things. And when it comes to science, we are trying to promote policy that's going to have a impact on drawing more funds to these urgent issues, and regulations on the seismic testing. And in recent times, the Greens political party just have jumped on board with the Great Southern Reef terminology and putting some plans forward to really assist, which is really great to see. My battery's dying. There we go. Okay, wasn't plugged in. All right, just got a couple more slides to go. Thanks to everyone that's still tuned in. I know I'm going over time a little bit. I do want to get to a couple of those questions. I've literally got like 4 more slides to go. So just quickly wanted to promote people to just appreciate and value what's on our doorstep here. This is just the Tennyson Dune systems. You know, we're so lucky in Adelaide and South Australia to have this incredible marine system on our doorstep. And by people actually acknowledging what we've had, what we've got, we can work together to really looking after it for generations to come. So if you do want to keep track of what we're up to with the Great Southern Reef project, a good place to start is the Great Southern Reef Instagram page. We will feature artists and creators every month. We talk about some of the latest science. We feature marine species and locations. And there's a lot to see on the Great Southern Reef website as well. My personal underwater page on Instagram is Ocean Imaging. You can check out some of the latest imagery that I'm taking around the Yorke Peninsula and beyond through there. And a resource and a page that I'd really encourage you to check out if you're interested in this sort of thing is the Great Southern Reef website. There's some excellent resources for school teachers in particular on there. We've got a monthly newsletter that we send out. So if you just go to that site and just plug your email address in, you get updates on all the latest activities and things going on. And there's my email address too, if you would like to reach out to me with any other questions too. So now onto a couple of the questions. So we did have a question come in before this started, and I would like to just quickly address that one. A lady called Michelle filmed this 11-arm sea star at the Port Lincoln pontoon, and I have dived around there. There's a lot going on. It's quite an underrated little dive site. And Michelle just wanted to know, what's going on here? Like, it was waving around and almost what it looked like at the surface of the water surface, and asking me what was happening with it. I don't know for sure, but I do know that the starfish, they tend to, they've got a really good sort of sense of smell. They've got these chemoreceptors on the tips of their arms, so they can navigate by sort of like smelling. So I'm guessing they probably think, oh, there's some nice food in this area, and they do feed on mussels. So perhaps there are some mussels growing up there, or perhaps even more likely, being a place where fishermen are, there could have been some yummy sort of smelly fishing bait in that area, and it was going up to explore what it was. So that's my best guess. If someone else has got a more scientific answer and knows that, I'm be curious to know. So I'm just going to address a couple of the comments here. Is diving viable Kangaroo Island? Yes, there is a new operator on Kangaroo Island, and definitely worth checking out. They're called Rad KI, and they take you to some amazing spots with their boat. One dive site in particular, one of my favorites, called the Pissy Boy Rocks. Funny name, but incredible dive site. Lots going on there. You get sea lions visit you. It's a little sanctuary across that north coast of Tassie. Port Noarlunga, it is certainly a good dive site. Anne has used the resources with your Year 9s. They are fantastic. Well, that means a lot. I really appreciate that the resources are getting used. Thank you. Asparagopsis, yes, this is something, there's only so much to that I can cover in this brief session, but yeah, absolutely. Asparagopsis, the native red seaweed that's being used to feed cows to reduce their methane emissions. And there's a few excellent organizations that are working to grow the Asparagopsis in a sustainable way, so it's not harming the environment, and yeah, having some excellent results on reducing the emissions by over like 90% of methane emissions on the cows by just incorporating a small amount of that into their diet. So thanks for bringing that one up, Karen. Emma, how connected is the Great Southern Reef? Continuous, or is it more patchy? Well, depends. Like the Great Barrier Reef as well is not one undisrupted reef. There's about 3,000 different reefs. And so it's kind of similar with the Great Southern Reef. There are sections that are a little bit more sparse, but what you do have is a lot of connectivity with the currents that flow down. So the East Australian current, and then you've got also the Lewin current, which wraps right around the bottom and into the Great Australian Bight and pushes the warm water down, and fish swim across it, larvae get distributed across it. And what is, I guess most important here is that we've got that one continuous species of a golden kelp that really forms the structure of what this ecosystem actually is. So it's quite remarkable to have that one dominant species across this large area. And yeah, to answer your question, there is a huge amount of connectivity, more than you would expect. So I think that's probably a good place to wrap things up now. If you do have other questions, yeah, please send through an email. I'd really encourage you to check out Great Southern Reef website. A couple of good resources. This is Marine Invertebrates of South Australia by Karen Gallett-Holmes. Also, Rudy and Stephen Coiter. So this one's all about the invertebrates. This is a good one for fish of Southern Australia. It's just within these two books, there's so much knowledge, such a great way to like actually figure out what you've seen down there. If you're interested in the seaweeds, this is an awesome one, Marine Plants of Australia. There's some really nice imagery in here, and it's just dense, full of the huge diversity of seaweeds that we've got. And then one of my personal favorites too is Roger Swainston's Fishes of Australia, Australia-wide. But these are all really intricately animated, beautiful guides to see all of the fish that we've got here in Australia. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks to Port Environment Centre for hosting this evening tonight. I've really had a lot of fun. It was fun preparing this because I was able to pull up some old photos, some photos that I've taken in the last couple of years that I've forgot that I'd taken. And yeah, hopefully it's inspired some of you guys to jump in the water yourself, or even study these things further. And yeah, look forward to sharing what we get up to with the Great Southern Reef Foundation in coming months and years. So yeah, thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stefan. That was, absolutely fascinating. Gorgeous pictures and super inspiring. Definitely inspired me to get back into diving and to talk more about the Great Southern Reef. So thank you everyone for tuning in. If you have any more questions, either for the Port Environment Centre or for the Great Southern Reef Foundation, I'll pop those emails in the chat as well. And I'll leave that chat open if anyone would like to share their favourite part, because that was great. So yeah, thank you, Stefan, and thanks everyone.
Cool, appreciate it, Charlotte. And thanks to everyone dropping positive vibes in the chat. Thanks a lot.